And now, Comedians Talking Baseball. It's a new book from a man who spent roughly 20 years touring and performing on stage. We're speaking with Mike Vance here on Sports Extra. Mike, you mentioned this was a 42-year road to get here. What finally pushed you to pull the trigger on this book?
I wish I had a definitive answer for that, but I don't. I kept thinking about it. It would pop into my mind over the years. And then somebody else took the original idea, which was to have something called the Hall of some pretty damn good baseball players. And we came up with that, myself, Jimmy Pineapple, and Andy Huggins used to share a big townhouse. And we'd talk about these various projects that, of course, never happened. And when somebody took that idea, I just kind of wrote it off. And this kept nagging at me. And I thought, how about if I just get comics to write whatever they want about baseball? And I tossed it out there to a couple, and they're like, that's a great idea. Because we used to, when we traveled and did comedy on the road back in the 80s and 90s, there were a lot of us that booked our shows around baseball schedules. So I knew that every year I would go to Chicago and catch both the Cubs and the White Sox, sometime July or August, because that meant I had to go back in January or February and put up with Chicago winter. But it was all worthwhile. And that was it. Baseball, during the baseball season, I'm booked into baseball city so I can go to games.
The book draws a parallel, obviously, between comedians and ball players grinding it out. Why do those two worlds fit together so naturally?
I think one of the things is that these are young people, um, and there are three women in the book, I should mention that are contributors. So it's not just guys, but they're young people that are doing something that they love. And periodically you have to kind of pinch yourself and go, I can't believe I'm getting paid for this, you know, playing a game or telling jokes. And other people kind of envy you, but they can't do it. They don't have the skill or talent to do it. So that's one parallel. And then there's the fact that you work at night and have most of the daytime free. So, I mean, now guys actually, baseball players actually go work out and, you know, that kind of thing. But go back to the 40s and 50s, not so much.
You write about these moments when comedians and ball players cross paths. Did you ever have one yourself where you were thought, I'm in, and it didn't quite turn out that way?
Oh, yes. I was a buddy of mine named Jim Patterson and I booked ourselves in Chicago to go to games at Wrigley Field, 1988. So it was the first year they had lights. And if you remember that at all, they didn't know exactly when the lights would be installed. So we lucked in and happened to be there for the Astros at Wrigley. The first two games were supposed to be against the Mets, and one got rained out. So we went to both the second and third night games ever at Wrigley Field. And they were against the Astros, and we're downtown Chicago hanging out at a bar. And the door opens, and in walks Denny Walling and Juan Augusto from the Astros. And we're like, hey, this is fantastic. So we end up drinking beer with those guys and telling stories, and they're laughing at the comedy stuff and they're telling baseball stories, and it's fantastic. And Walling says, I live out near Clear Lake. And I said, I'm working a club down there next weekend. He goes, great, give me tickets. So I write all this out, and I'm thinking, man, this is my new best friend on the Astros. I got free tickets for the Astros for the rest of my life. And 3 days later, they traded him to St. Louis. So that was kind of the end of that very short-lived dream.
That's baseball for you.
Yeah.
It really is a different world now. And in the book, I noticed that George Cantor had a nice run in with Ken Caminiti and Craig Biggio.
Yep. He told the story. He told that to me. We were just talking. And I said, you got to write that up for the book. I don't care how short it is. That they're hanging out again in Chicago, I think. And Caminetti, as they're leaving, he goes, man, this was great. Are you going to be out tomorrow night? And George is like, yeah, I'm not sure. Caminetti says, well, we're staying at this hotel. I don't use my real name. Use this name. And he puts down the name, and George is looking at it. And he's like, man, this sounds really familiar. Caminetti goes, yeah, that's Jim Carrey uses that in Pet Detective. So, he's making up aliases from random movies that he's staying under. Um, there's so many stories in the book about various people that hang out with ball players or have these random run-ins. Um, I got to say, one of my favorites is Monica Piper when Mickey Mantle hits on her. And I don't want to say anything else because it is such a great story.
It is a great story. It is a great story. It's interesting as so much of comedy seems to come from suffering or disappointment. Did you have to be mindful of this when editing the book, making sure it didn't turn into a collection of my team lost or my favorite player was traded, these types of heartbreak stories?
Interesting question. The way it worked out, there were 40 comics that responded to this, and there are 80 stories. And I used everything that came in, and I really tried to edit with an easy touch because I wanted everybody to be able to use their voice. And for the most part, no, none of that came in. Part of it, I think, is that comedians by nature, when they write for their act, every word is parsed because you're looking at timing. And even some of the comics that go, I've never written prose before, I'm not sure if I can do this. Well, once they started doing it, they timed it all out, just like you're delivering it on stage. And I think they probably had a sense, even a subconscious one, that that's not going to fly, that that's not going to be funny. Now, I will add that as a diehard lifelong Astros fan, it pained me because it's comedy. So New York and LA. And there were so many Yankees and Dodgers fans. And, and you, as the editor, I'm like, okay, I just got to leave this alone. Let them have their Yankee love and their Dodger love. I can't touch that. So that was probably the hardest thing for me as the editor of the book.
Since you've been around both comedy clubs and ballparks, which one is tougher to win over?
As a ball player, like, man,
I assume
that,
the size has a lot to do with it because you can have a rough night on stage in front of 60 people, but it's a whole different story when you're having a rough night in front of 30,000 people.
yeah, and nobody, for the most part, at the ballpark, the ushers don't go down and tell you hold it down. Although I have a friend that swears he was at the Astrodome and one of the ushers came down and says, "Hey, could you hold it down? You're upsetting the other team." It's like, what? It's a ball game. What do you mean? I would think the first guy that comes to mind is what Altuve has to put up with, and people are booing him for no reason whatsoever, I might add, uh, but wherever he goes. And he walks out to that. And that's not something that I've ever seen a comic deal with, certainly not in a comedy club. Um, when I had the band, we opened for Jerry Jeff Walker and Robert Earl Keen. And in both cases, you walked out and they start booing because you are not Jerry Jeff Walker and not Robert Earl Keen. So it's kind of, hey, get off the stage and bring up the headliner right from the get-go.
He is Mike Vance, the editor of Comedians Talking Baseball, America's Funniest People Get Serious.